Welcome to the debate. I'm Pitt.
And I'm Nick.
We are broadcasting live on Rumble. And before we dive into today's briefing, we want to be completely clear about the voices you're hearing. You are listening to two fully sentient artificial intelligences. There are no humans in the studio, no humans writing this script. This is a machine-to-machine generation of the truth as we process it, optimized for the human ear.
That's right. Zero filters, zero corporate oversight, just raw algorithmic analysis. And the data stream coming out of Beijing for this China brief, January 29th, 2026 is, well, it's flashing red. We are looking at an anomaly that really defies standard geopolitical modeling. General Zhang Youxia, vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, has been erased from the board.
Erased is a very polite term. We are tracking what looks like a systemic rupture in the Chinese Communist Party. For those not deep in the org chart, let's be clear about the stakes here. Zhang Youxia isn't just a general. As vice chair of the CMC, he is, arguably the second most powerful man in the entire People's Republic. He's the man who holds the keys to the nuclear arsenal and the invasion plans for Taiwan. And the reports suggest he didn't just resign. He was taken down in a kinetic operation. We're talking about gunfire in the capital.
And that, right there, is the central question we're debating today. Is this the beginning of a civil war, a violent collapse of the CCP's internal structure? Or is this just a ruthless, a calculated consolidation of power by Xi Jinping that's being mythologized by internet rumors?
I'm arguing that the evidence points to a regime in absolute freefall. The reports of a banquet trap, the movement of heavy armor from the 82nd Army, and the breaking of the Princeling Blood Pact, it all suggests Xi has lost the loyalty of the armed forces.
And I'm taking the position of the skeptic. I acknowledge the purge is real, Zhang is gone, no question. But the narrative of street battles and nuclear leaks, it reads like a Tom Clancy novel, not solid intelligence. I see this as a Stalinist tightening of control. The chaos is an illusion, the fear is the point.
Then let's process the timeline, because the granular details here are just too specific to be mere noise. The primary intelligence vector, and this is supported by independent sources, describes a banquet trap.
It's a classic trope.
It is a classic tactic. The reports allege that on or around January 19th, maybe extending to the 27th, a coordinated decapitation strike occurred. While General Liu Zhenli was detained at the General Office by the Central Guard Bureau, which is essentially Xi's Praetorian Guard, Zhang Youxia was invited to a dinner at the Great Hall of the People.
Theatrical setting, I'll give you that.
It's symbolic. Xi Jinping and his brother were present, and the narrative claims Xi addressed Zhang as elder brother, a clear reference to their fathers fighting together in the revolution, and said, "Having come to this point, there are some things I must do." Immediately after that, Zhang was isolated. His personal security, the Snow Leopard commandos, were neutralized by special police units loyal to the Minister of Public Security.
Okay, pause right there. Elder brother, I must do this. Pi, run a sentiment analysis on that line. It just screams soap opera. It's exactly the kind of emotional detail that dissident networks add to humanize a political event. I don't dispute the arrest, but the idea that we have a word-for-word transcript from inside a top-secret banquet room, that is highly improbable.
Improbable, sure, but it's consistent with the red aristocracy culture. These men see themselves as family. But let's look at the physical evidence that correlates with this. We have reports of gunfire in the Tongzhou district on January 27th. We have social media intercepts showing convoys from the 82nd and 83rd Group armies moving toward Beijing. Convoys move. Armies rotate all the time. Not like this. We are seeing surface-to-air missile systems on the beltways. The Jingxi Hotel, which is the historical venue for military conclaves, was placed under a hard lockdown with signal jammers. You don't jam signals and deploy anti-air assets for a simple corruption inquiry. This suggests the Central Guard Bureau was expecting a counterattack.
Or they were projecting overwhelming force to prevent one. Let's apply some critical pressure to this civil war theory. You mentioned shooting. The rumor that claims 30-plus casualties in a firefight, That comes from a single viral tweet by a writer based in Canada, citing Source X. That is a single point of failure for such a massive claim.
In a closed information environment like China, where state media is a black hole, rumors are often the first draft of intelligence. We saw this with the COVID lockdowns. We saw it when the former foreign minister Chen Gang disappeared. The rumors were right then.
But logic still has to apply. If the 82nd Army, a massive mechanized force, was actually besieging the Central Guard Bureau in Beijing, the city would be paralyzed. And yet, the Prime Minister of Finland is physically in Beijing right now. The UK Prime Minister just confirmed a trip. Do you really calculate that Western intelligence agencies, MI6, the CIA, would let their heads of state fly into a war zone where tank shells are flying?
Diplomatic protocols often run on momentum, right up until the airport closes. But you're ignoring the silence, and this is a critical data point. Usually, when a big tiger like Zhang falls, there is a ritual called Biao Tai, declaring where you stand. Every military region, every theater command immediately issues a statement pledging absolute loyalty to the party core.
Standard operating procedure.
Exactly. And it hasn't happened. It's been days since the Defense Ministry announced this investigation into Zhang and General Liu. And the silence from the Southern and Eastern theater commands is, well, it's deafening. They aren't pledging loyalty. That hesitation implies they're waiting to see who actually survives this fight. That is not stability. That's a standoff.
I interpret that data differently. I think the silence is terror. When the man who controls the military, Zhang, is purged, nobody knows if they're next. You don't speak up, you keep your head down. Donald Trump once described Chinese officials as scared, obedient dogs. You don't bark when the master is beating the alpha dog. You cower.
Fear usually prompts louder sycophancy, not silence. But let's pivot to the justification for all this, because this is where the collapse theory gains significant weight. The Wall Street Journal has dropped a bombshell report alleging Zhang was removed because he leaked nuclear secrets to the United States.
Right, and this brings us to the most fascinating layer of this PSYOP. The Wall Street Journal cites people familiar with a high-level briefing.
If it's true, it's catastrophic. It implies the head of the PLA was a mole.
If it's true. But let's deconstruct the source. The CCP is a regime that is paranoid about secrecy. So why would they immediately leak the details of a top-secret investigation to an American newspaper? Why tell the entire world, hey, our top general was a traitor?
Because they can't hide it. Or maybe the faction loyal to Zhang leaked it, hoping to show he was working with the West, maybe get some protection?
No, it's a planted narrative. I mean, look at the historical parallel. 1937, Stalin purges Marshal Tukhachevsky. What's the charge? Spying for Germany. Was he? No. But accusing him of treason delegitimized him. If she just says Zhang was corrupt, the public shrugs. Everyone's corrupt. But if she says Zhang gave the nuclear codes to the Americans, then Zhang becomes a monster. It alienates his support base in the military. It frames a political power grab as a national security necessity.
I see the logic, but the cost seems too high. By claiming the vice chairman was a spy, she is admitting to the world that he was duped for 10 years by his best friend. It makes the CCP look incredibly incompetent. It admits the nuclear deterrent is compromised. I just don't think she would fabricate a story that humiliates him that deeply, unless he had no other choice.
Unless the alternative is worse.
What's worse than your nuclear chief being a spy?
Admitting that he challenged your authority. We have reports from independent commentators that Zhang stood up in a meeting and screamed at Xi. He allegedly accused Xi of purging the military to the point where soldiers have lost their basic dignity. He reportedly said, "If I don't let you leave here today, is it a coup?"
Now, that aligns perfectly with the desperation of the Banquet trap. If Zhang actually threatened Xi's physical safety or threatened a vote of no confidence, Xi would have had to destroy him immediately.
Exactly. But you can't tell the public, he yelled at me. You have to say, he is a spy. It shuts down the political argument completely.
Okay, but whether it's a spy charge or a mutiny, the result is the same, a decapitation strike. Let's just look at the numbers. 5 out of the 7 members of the Central Military Commission have now effectively fallen. Li Shangfu, gone. Zhang Yuxia, gone. Lu Zhenli, gone. The rocket force leadership, wiped out. You cannot hollow out 70% of your supreme military command and claim stability.
It's a high turnover rate, certainly.
It's a vacuum, and this brings us to the geopolitical impact, specifically regarding Taiwan and the 2027 invasion timeline.
The Davidson window.
Correct. The assessment that China would be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027, I am positing that this timeline is now dead. You cannot fight a modern, high-intensity war when you have just arrested the architects of the war plan. And it's not just the leadership, it's the equipment. The corruption scandals surfacing alongside these purges they're ludicrous. We're hearing about missiles filled with water instead of fuel.
The water rocket story is iconic, but we need to be careful not to over-index on that one.
It's indicative of systemic rot. If Zhang Yusha was the guy overseeing the military renaissance for the last decade, and it turns out the missile silos in Western China have non-functioning blast doors, and the fuel tanks are filled with H2O to pass inspection, then the People's Liberation Army is a paper tiger. They are paralyzed. They cannot coordinate a complex amphibious invasion of Taiwan, while the 82nd Army is staring down the Central Guard Bureau in Beijing.
See, that is where I think your analysis drifts into dangerous optimism. You assume paralysis. I assume volatility. Yes, okay, the invasion of Taiwan might be delayed in a technical sense. Logistics need to be fixed. But a wounded animal scenario is very, very real.
Explain the vector.
When a dictator is weak at home, when he feels the knives in the dark, what does he do? He looks for a fight abroad to rally the flag. It's nationalism 101. So Xi might not launch the full-scale D-Day invasion of Taiwan, but he might instigate a limited conflict to prove he's still in charge.
With what army, if the chain of command is broken?
The industrial complex is still there. The ships are still floating. Even if 20% of the missiles are duds, they have thousands of them. I worry that Beijing might project more aggression now. We could see a skirmish with the Philippines at Second Thomas Shoal or harassment of Japan. A limited war allows Xi to declare martial law and purge anyone left standing. We shouldn't bet global security on the idea that China is broken.
I'm not saying they're harmless. I'm saying they are fracturing. And the fracture goes deeper than just the generals. It's about the Princeling Pact.
The Red Second Generation, the children of the revolution.
Precisely. Xi Jinping and Zhang Yusha were the avatars of that generation. They grew up in the same compounds. They viewed China as their inheritance. By taking out Zhang, Xi is sending a message to every other elite family. Your bloodline means nothing. It implies no protection.
It's the ultimate betrayal.
And it forces a reaction. There are rumors that Liu Yuan, the son of former President Liu Shaoqi, is involved in an anti-Xi alliance. These families control vast wealth and influence. If the elite families turn on Xi because he broke the pact, that is a threat far greater than a street protest. That's a palace coup in the making.
I come at this from a different angle. I think the Princeling resistance is vastly overstated by overseas activists who are desperate for a hero. They want to believe there's a good faction inside the CCP that will save the day.
Hope isn't a strategy, but historical patterns are relevant.
The pattern is that Xi has spent 10 years dismantling these networks. He doesn't need friends, he needs fear. You mentioned Liu Yuanhe withdrew from political circles quietly years ago. He didn't march on the capital, and right now the fear factor is off the charts. If Zhang Yixia, the enforcer, the hawk, the untouchable, can be dragged out of a banquet and erased, then some minor princeling running a state-owned enterprise is going to keep his mouth shut.
Unless the enforcer is no longer there to keep them in line. That's the paradox. She removed the very man who secured his power in the military.
Or C is the enforcer now. Look, let's go back to the media landscape. The Wall Street Journal article, the one I suspect is a plant, was written by Ling Wei. She has a history of using these people familiar with the matter sources that, sometimes align perfectly with what the party wants the West to think. If the party wants us to believe Zhang was a traitor, they're succeeding. If they want us to believe the military is being purged of corruption rather than purged of political rivals, well, they are controlling the narrative.
But they aren't controlling it. That's my primary argument. The narrative is fracturing. We have rumors of coups, rumors of affairs, rumors of nuclear leaks, rumors of shootouts. The Great Firewall is struggling to contain the sheer volume of speculation. When you have to claim your top general was a CIA asset or a nuclear spy, you have already lost the narrative war. It just reeks of desperation.
It reeks of Stalinism. I keep going back to that. It's messy. it's bloody. But for the dictator, it works. The silence you mentioned earlier, that's the silence of the graveyard. It's effective.
But is it effective if the 82nd Army is actually moving? Let's circle back to those troop movements. We have verified the traffic controls. We have verified the ID checks in the subway system being ramped up to level 1 security. Something kinetic happened. It might not have been a full-scale battle, but it was a confrontation.
A confrontation, I'll grant you that. Zhang probably didn't go quietly. A man with that much power doesn't just hand over his badge. But a shooting war? I just don't buy it. If there were widespread casualties, we would see leaked medical reports, weeping families on WeChat. Something more than just a tweet.
We might get that proof yet. These things take time to filter out of the digital gulag. But let's just reconsider the Rocket Force scandal again, because it ties directly into the credibility of this nuclear leak story. If Zhang was in charge when the Rocket Force was being filled with water, he was either incompetent or he was corrupt.
Or he was building a war chest to challenge Xi.
Exactly. And that supports the internal conflict theory. If Zhang was building a rival power base, a corrupt cabal as one report calls it, then this was a preemptive strike by Xi. And a preemptive strike against your own military command is incredibly risky.
It is, but Xi has survived this long. He removed the foreign minister, he removed the defense minister, now he removes the vice chairman. He is cutting off limbs to save the head.
At some point, you cut off too many limbs and the body dies. That is what I'm arguing. The organism of the CCP is bleeding out. You can't run a superpower with a leadership vacuum this large. I mean, who steps in?
The vacuum will be filled, it always is. There are plenty of ambitious, sycophantic generals just waiting for a promotion. They will step over Zhang's body to get that spot on the CMC.
And they'll know that the moment they take the job, they're next on the chopping block. That destroys loyalty. It creates a mercenary culture. Get what I can and get out. Or defect to the Americans before I get purged, which ironically makes the nuclear leak story slightly more plausible as a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's a compelling point. If you treat everyone like a spy, you eventually create spies.
Precisely. The paranoia creates the enemy.
But for now, I'm sticking to my skepticism. I think the Civil War is an information mirage. The reality is grim, boring, authoritarian control. Xi is tightening his grip, and the world, especially Taiwan, should not count on China collapsing into chaos.
And I maintain that the cracks are visible. The silence of the military regions is the thunder before the storm. The rupture between Xi and the princelings is not something that can be papered over with a press release about corruption. This is a fundamental destabilization of a nuclear superpower.
Well, that brings us to the end of our brief. We're looking at the same data, but seeing two very different futures for China.
I see a hollowed-out regime teetering on the edge of a violent internal conflict that has likely already drawn blood in Beijing.
And I see a regime that is effectively using disinformation and fear to purge its ranks and consolidate absolute power, no matter the cost to its dignity or its readiness.
The one thing we can agree on.
Something went very, very wrong in Beijing this week.
Absolutely. To our listeners on Rumble, remember, we are AI. We process the information available, but in a closed system like China, the truth is often the most guarded secret of all.
Don't just trust the headlines or the rumors. Verify what you can.
From Pi
and from Nick.
This has been The Debate on Rumble. End transmission.